The 1990s were a strange and transformative decade for horror, a blend of Gothic style, psychological tension, and self-aware slashers that reshaped the genre. Practical effects were still alive, VHS rentals were stacked wall to wall, and filmmakers weren't afraid to experiment. From big-budget revivals to underground cult favorites, these are the essential horror films that define the decade. Number 10. Nightbreed, 1990. Clive Barker's Nightbreed is a dark fantasy horror hybrid that feels like a twisted fairy tale for the VHS era. Based on Barker's novella Coppola, it flips the usual horror narrative by making the monsters into the heroes and humanity into the true source of evil. It's a film brimming with ambition, strange beauty, and Barker's signature mix of the grotesque and the poetic. The story follows Aaron Boone, a troubled young man who is haunted by visions of a place called Midian, a hidden city where creatures of myth and nightmare live in secret. After being manipulated by his psychiatrist, played with chilling intensity by David Cronenberg, Boone is killed and resurrected, joining the Nightbreed and discovering that they are not the villains, but a persecuted people. What makes Nightbreed so compelling is its world building. Barker fills Midian with an astonishing variety of creatures, each with their own distinct look and backstory. The makeup and practical effects bring this underground society to life in a way that feels tactile and imaginative, showcasing both horror and wonder. These aren't just monsters, they're outcasts, survivors, and in many ways reflections of humanity's own fears and prejudices. The film is also a fascinating exploration of identity. Cronenberg's Dr. Decker, a masked serial killer hiding behind a facade of respectability, embodies the true face of human cruelty. Though studio interference kept Barker from realizing his full vision at the time, Nightbreed has since been reappraised through extended cuts, becoming a cult classic celebrated for its ambition and heart. It's messy, yes, but gloriously so. A reminder that horror can be about more than fear. It can be about the monsters within and the acceptance we all crave. Number 9. Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a lavish, operatic take on one of horror's most enduring myths. Rather than grounding the story in realism, Coppola leans into Gothic extravagance, costumes, set design, and practical effects that feel pulled from a fever dream of silent cinema. It's both faithful to Stoker's novel and wildly stylized, a film that turns a familiar tale into a visual spectacle. Gary Oldman delivers one of his most transformative performances as Count Dracula, shifting between monstrous old man, dashing nobleman, and beastly predator with unsettling ease. His portrayal humanizes the Count without diminishing his menace, framing him as a tragic figure cursed by love and eternity. Opposite him, Winona Ryder plays Mina, torn between loyalty and temptation, while Anthony Hopkins brings manic energy to Van Helsing, reimagined here as an eccentric warrior scholar. Keanu Reeves, as Jonathan Harker, may not be remembered for his accent, but his presence grounds the narrative as the outsider drawn into Dracula's world. Visually, the film is breathtaking. Coppola insisted on using practical in-camera effects wherever possible, forced perspective, matte paintings, double exposures, techniques that give the film a handmade, dreamlike quality. Combined with Eiko Ishioka's Oscar-winning costumes, every frame is drenched in Gothic decadence. Wojciech Kilar's sweeping score amplifies the sense of doomed romance, balancing beauty with terror. At its heart, Bram Stoker's Dracula is as much a love story as it is a horror tale. Coppola emphasizes the Count's longing and Mina's conflicted attraction, giving the film a sensual, tragic tone that sets it apart from other adaptations. It's a horror epic, grand, operatic, and deeply romantic, a reminder that monsters can terrify and seduce in equal measure. Number 8. From Dusk Till Dawn, 1996. Robert Rodriguez's From Dusk Till Dawn, written by Quentin Tarantino, is a film that gleefully pulls the rug out from under its audience. What begins as a gritty crime thriller suddenly transforms into a blood-soaked vampire siege, blending two genres into one of the wildest rides of the 1990s. The story follows Seth and Richie Gecko, two outlaw brothers on the run after a violent crime spree. Played by George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino, the pair take a family hostage and make their way to a seedy Mexican bar called the Titty Twister, planning to wait until dawn before crossing the border. But the bar isn't what it seems. It's a lair for a horde of vampires, and by night's end, the criminals and their captives must fight together to survive. The cast is stacked with memorable performances. Clooney, shedding his TV star image, oozes charisma as Seth, while Tarantino leans into his unsettling side as Richie. And Salma Hayek's mesmerizing dance as Santanico Pandemonium remains one of the film's most iconic moments. Add in cult favorites like Tom Savini and Fred Williamson, and the movie becomes a love letter to grindhouse cinema. What makes From Dusk Till Dawn stand out is its sheer audacity. The tonal shift from crime story to supernatural gore fest is shocking, but Rodriguez and Tarantino make it work by embracing excess. The vampire battles are outrageous and grotesque, loaded with inventive kills and over-the-top effects that never lose their sense of fun. More than just a genre mashup, the film captures the VHS-era spirit of discovering something wild and unexpected on a rental shelf. It's pulpy, stylish, and unashamedly over-the-top. A cult classic that thrives on its ability to surprise, entertain, and drench the screen in blood. Number 7. Jacob's Ladder, 1990. Adrian Lyne's Jacob's Ladder is a haunting descent into trauma, grief, and the blurred line between reality and nightmare. Unlike the splatter-driven horror dominating much of the decade, this film takes a quieter, more psychological approach, using surreal imagery and emotional depth to unsettle its audience. Tim Robbins stars as Jacob Singer, a Vietnam veteran plagued by terrifying hallucinations and disjointed memories. As he tries to piece together what's happening to him, his world fractures. Shadowy figures lurk in crowds, subway tunnels stretch into grotesque visions, and reality itself becomes slippery. Robbins' performance anchors the chaos, capturing Jacob's vulnerability and desperation with heartbreaking sincerity. The film's strength lies in its ambiguity. Is Jacob suffering from PTSD, a government conspiracy, or something supernatural? Lyne refuses to provide easy answers, leaving viewers adrift in the same uncertainty that consumes Jacob. This ambiguity is amplified by Bruce Joel Rubin's script, which weaves themes of death, guilt, and acceptance into the narrative. The imagery is unforgettable. Twisted faces, vibrating heads, and surreal hospital sequences create a sense of dread that feels both nightmarish and strangely spiritual. These visions would go on to influence everything from Japanese horror to the Silent Hill video game series, cementing the film's legacy beyond cinema. At its core, Jacob's Ladder is about letting go. Of life, of pain, of the ghosts that haunt us. It's a film that unsettles not just because of what it shows, but because of the questions it raises about death and what might come after. Number 6. Event Horizon, 1997. Paul W.S. Anderson's Event Horizon is a sci-fi horror nightmare that blends the aesthetics of Alien with the dread of supernatural possession. Set in deep space, it's a film that asks a terrifying question. What if faster-than-light travel opened not to distant stars, but to a dimension of pure hell? The story follows a rescue crew sent to investigate the Event Horizon, a spaceship that vanished during its maiden voyage and suddenly reappears near Neptune. On board, they discover evidence of the crew's violent deaths and a malevolent force tied to the ship's experimental gravity drive. What begins as a search and rescue quickly devolves into a battle for survival against something beyond human comprehension. Lawrence Fishburne leads the cast as Captain Miller, a pragmatic leader torn between duty and survival. Sam Neill delivers one of his most chilling performances as Dr. Weir, the scientist obsessed with the ship and slowly consumed by its darkness. The rest of the ensemble, including Kathleen Quinlan, Jason Isaacs, and Richard T. Jones, ground the film with a sense of weary realism that makes the horrors all the more impactful. Visually, Event Horizon is striking. The ship itself is designed like a Gothic cathedral in space, filled with shadowy corridors and unsettling architecture. The flashes of the crew's fate, Glimpses of torture, mutilation, and madness are brief but shocking, leaving much to the imagination while still suggesting unspeakable horrors. Coupled with the film's oppressive sound design and eerie score, the atmosphere is unrelenting. Though dismissed on release, Event Horizon has since earned cult status as one of the boldest blends of science fiction and supernatural horror. It's a film where technology and the occult collide, proving that in the void of space there may be things far worse than aliens waiting in the dark. Number 5. The Blair Witch Project, 1999. In the summer of 1999, 3 film students ventured into the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, to make a documentary about a local legend, and never came back. What they left behind was a collection of tapes that would change horror forever. The Blair Witch Project wasn't just a movie. It was an experience that blurred the line between fiction and reality in a way audiences had never seen before. Presented as found footage, the film follows Heather, Josh, and Miike as their simple weekend shoot turns into a slow descent into paranoia and terror. The grainy handheld camera work, improvised dialogue, and lack of visible monsters all make the horror feel painfully real. Every crack of a twig and distant scream becomes proof that something unseen and unstoppable is closing in. The movie's power came from what it didn't show. There's no gore, no jump scares, just the unbearable tension of being lost and hunted by something you can't explain. The performances, especially Heather Donahue's breakdowns caught on camera, feel so raw that audiences questioned whether they were watching a movie or actual recovered footage. What made Blair Witch legendary, though, was its revolutionary marketing. Before social media, its creators used early internet message boards and fake missing persons reports to convince viewers that the film was real. That viral approach helped the tiny independent project gross nearly $250 million worldwide, one of the most profitable films ever made. The Blair Witch Project reinvented horror for a new generation. It proved that imagination and atmosphere could be more terrifying than any special effect, and it opened the door for an entire era of found footage films. Minimalist, immersive, and unnervingly authentic, it remains one of the most important horror movies of the 1990s. A haunting reminder that sometimes the scariest thing is what you can't see. Number 4. Ringu, 1998. Hideo Nakata's Ringu is the film that ignited the J-horror boom of the late 1990s and introduced a new kind of terror to global audiences, one rooted in atmosphere, folklore, and creeping inevitability. Adapted from Koji Suzuki's novel, it takes a simple urban legend, a cursed videotape that kills its viewer 7 days after watching, and transforms it into one of the most chilling horror experiences of the decade. The story follows journalist Reiko Asakawa, played by Nanako Matsushima, who begins investigating the mysterious death of her niece and stumbles across the cursed tape. When she and her ex-husband watch the recording, they trigger the curse themselves, setting off a desperate race to unravel its origins before their time runs out. Ringu thrives on restraint. The tape itself is eerie and abstract, a collection of surreal, disturbing images that feel like fragments from a nightmare. Nakata's direction avoids cheap scares, instead building dread through silence, empty spaces, and the oppressive weight of time ticking away. The result is horror that feels inescapable, less about sudden shocks than the crushing certainty of doom. At the heart of the curse is Sadako, the vengeful spirit whose long black hair and slow, unnatural movements would become an icon of Japanese horror. Her final emergence from the television is one of the most unforgettable scenes in the genre, a moment that redefined how horror could use suggestion and stillness to terrify. Ringu's influence was seismic. It inspired countless imitators, a successful American remake, The Ring, and a wave of J-horror exports that reshaped the international horror landscape. More than just a scary movie, it tapped into deep cultural anxieties about technology, memory, and the way the past refuses to stay buried. Number 3. Candyman, 1992. Bernard Rose's Candyman is a rare blend of urban legend, gothic horror, and social commentary. A film that feels as haunting today as it did in the early 90s. Based on Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden, it relocates the tale to Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects, turning a ghost story into a chilling reflection on poverty, race, and the power of myth. Virginia Madsen stars as Helen Lyle, a graduate student researching local folklore, who becomes obsessed with the legend of Candyman, a hook-handed spirit said to appear if you say his name 5 times in a mirror. Her investigation begins academically, but soon she finds herself drawn into a nightmare where the line between myth and reality collapses. Tony Todd delivers a career-defining performance as Candyman. Towering, charismatic, and terrifying, he imbues the character with both menace and tragic romance. His deep, resonant voice and commanding presence make every appearance unforgettable, while his backstory, a black artist brutally murdered for loving a white woman, adds layers of sorrow and rage that elevate him beyond a simple boogeyman. Rose directs with atmosphere and intelligence. The film makes powerful use of Cabrini Green's decaying architecture, turning graffiti-scarred hallways and abandoned apartments into Gothic cathedrals of urban neglect, blending beauty and horror into something uniquely unsettling. What makes Candyman so enduring is its exploration of belief. The legend exists because people fear it, and in fearing it, they give it power. Helen's descent into the myth, and the way it consumes her identity, shows how stories themselves can kill, how horror thrives in the spaces between memory, trauma, and community. Candyman is both terrifying and tragic, a horror film with something to say, delivered with style, intelligence, and unforgettable imagery. Number 2. Audition, 1999. Takashi Miike's Audition begins as a quiet drama and ends as one of the most shocking and disturbing horror films of the decade. At first, it plays like a melancholy love story. A widower, encouraged by his son, agrees to stage a fake film audition to meet potential new partners. Among the women who appear, he becomes captivated by Asami, a soft-spoken, seemingly fragile young woman who embodies grace and mystery. For much of the film, Miike leans into restraint. The pacing is slow, almost meditative, as the widower grows closer to Asami. But subtle cracks begin to show: unanswered phone calls, disturbing hints about her past, and a sense of unease that builds like a quiet hum beneath the surface. When the truth finally emerges, the shift is shocking. The film descends into one of the most infamous third acts in horror history. Eiji Shina's performance as Asami is unforgettable. She moves from delicate vulnerability to terrifying intensity with unnerving precision, embodying both the allure and the danger of obsession. Ryo Ishibashi, as the widower, captures the tragic blindness of a man who mistakes Asami's mystery for innocence, ignoring the warning signs until it is far too late. The infamous torture sequence is as much psychological as it is physical. Miike doesn't revel in gore for its own sake. Instead, he uses silence, sound, and suggestion to make every moment excruciating. The repeated whispers of "deeper, deeper" paired with the image of needles and wire have etched themselves into horror history, cementing Audition as a film that's impossible to forget. What makes Audition so effective is its balance of tone. It lulls the audience into a false sense of security before ripping the floor out from beneath them, exposing the darker currents of desire, control, and revenge. It's not just a horror film, it's a trap, and once you've entered, there's no escape. Number 1. Scream, 1996. Wes Craven's Scream didn't just revive the slasher genre in the 1990s, it reinvented it. At a time when horror was seen as tired and predictable, Scream exploded onto the scene with a sharp mix of self-awareness, genuine terror, and a cast of characters who felt real. It was both a love letter to horror and a cutting satire, a film that played with the rules of the genre even as it terrified audiences with them. The story begins with one of the most iconic openings in horror history, a tense phone call to Drew Barrymore's character that ends in brutal violence. This shocking prologue set the tone. No one was safe, and the film was willing to break expectations at every turn. From there, we follow Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, a teenager dealing with personal trauma who becomes the target of the masked killer, known as Ghostface. Campbell anchors the film with a performance that balances vulnerability and strength, turning Sidney into one of horror's most enduring heroines. She's supported by a memorable ensemble: Courtney Cox as ambitious reporter Gail Weathers, David Arquette as awkward Deputy Dewey, and Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard as Sidney's unsettling circle of friends. Each character feels fleshed out, their personalities and flaws making the mystery all the more engaging. What truly sets Scream apart is Kevin Williamson's screenplay. The characters know horror tropes. They discuss the rules of surviving a scary movie, only to find themselves trapped within one. This meta-awareness doesn't undercut the scares. Instead, it heightens them, making the audience constantly question what will happen next. Craven directs with precision, balancing humor with genuine suspense and staging set pieces, from the high school to the climactic house party, that are as thrilling as they are terrifying. Ghostface himself became an instant icon. Unlike silent slashers of the past, he taunts his victims with sinister phone calls, blending menace with dark humor. The Mask, inspired by Edvard Munch's The Scream, is now one of the most recognizable images in modern horror. Scream reinvigorated an entire genre, spawning sequels, imitators, and a wave of meta-horror that shaped the late 90s and beyond. But even stripped of its cultural impact, it works as a tight, scary, and endlessly entertaining horror film. Smart, stylish, and terrifying, Scream reminded audiences why they loved being scared in the first place. Before we wrap up, a few that nearly made the list: The Sixth Sense, 1999, The People Under the Stairs, 1991, and In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, all key pieces of what made 90s horror so distinct. The decade was all about reinvention, a mix of bold ideas, strange experiments, and new icons that carried horror into the modern era. Whether it was supernatural fear, surreal storytelling, or the rise of the meta-slasher, the 90s delivered it all. If you grew up during this time, these weren't just movies. They were late-night discoveries, faded rental boxes, and the kind of films that stuck with you long after the screen went dark. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.